Disney's new DuckTales series is a show about adventure, solving mysteries, rewriting history, taking big, globe-trotting journeys into the unknown in search of myth, legend, and fortune. But unlike Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Webby, most of us didn't grow up with that kind of adventure in our lives, save for one rare annual quest. The night when kids get to form a band of heroes and venture into the darkness, in a safe, family-friendly sort of way. The magical night known as Halloween. Trick-or-treating was always a rare adventure on its own. But as we get older, Halloween changes. Maybe trick-or-treating isn't enough. Maybe you're looking for an adventure that's just a little bit more intense.
We're going to Hazel House.
This is the Trickening. As someone who grew up watching the original 1987 series, almost everything about Disney's new DuckTales series is inherently nostalgic for me. Sure, there's new versions of these characters, but at their hearts, these are kids I grew up with, elders I looked up to, and young adults I wanted to be like as I grew older. This episode hits on a completely different kind of nostalgia, one that's hard to quantify. Nostalgia for a childlike excitement. Nostalgia for a faint but fond memory. I don't know how they did it, but this episode of DuckTales has captured how Halloween felt to little baby Seaniccus as a child. Almost perfectly. It could be the way every character in this episode has a different take on what Halloween is to them. The perfect kid-friendly adventure for Huey. The ultimate heist to get a lifetime supply of candy for Louie. An excuse to be perfectly hilarious for Dewey.
I'm a pirate on vacation.
A chance to indulge in your sense of weirdness with a hint of darkness for Webby. Maybe Scrooge's ambition to get more candy than anyone else. Della's delight in scaring children, and Donald's eagerness to share the holiday spirit with kids by passing out candy. All of those are valid, familiar takes on this holiday that I can pin to someone I knew growing up. All of those might be it. But maybe it's just how this episode is colored. There's muted colors throughout the episode, and a dim twilight of the recently set sun glowing just past the horizon. Honestly, it's hard to say. It's probably just a consequence of having grown up in the 1990s, around the same time the creators of the new DuckTales series grew up. But all I know is that somehow, this episode captured that buzzing excitement and atmosphere for Halloween almost exactly as I remember it as a child myself. In a way that few other Halloween movies or specials ever have for me before. Of course, that doesn't mean my childhood Halloweens were quite as adventurous as the Duck family's. As I said before, in this episode everyone kind of has their own idea of what Halloween is and should be, and how those ideas come in conflict with each other is kind of one of the things that makes this episode work so well. Huey, for instance, wants to plan the perfect Halloween night, and he's clearly put a lot of time into making a trick-or-treating route, a schedule, and a plan to make sure they all have a great time and get a year's worth of candy.
First up, Rocker Duck Estates for the big bars and candy corn relay, then down to Silverbeak for the Haunted Hayride Spooktacular.
Honestly, that sounds like a really fun night. But Louie has another idea.
Forget the legwork. I've got a plan that'll make us candy billionaires.
We're going to a candy store?
No, it's nighttime. Candy stores are closed.
We're gonna rob a candy store?
No.
No, Louie wants to go to the local haunted house, which is fabled to have decades of candy hidden away inside, all of it stolen from unwitting trick-or-treaters over the years. I think this plot is another one of those little things that makes this episode work so well as a Halloween story. Every town has its local legends, stories passed around by kids on the playground. Any kid can tell you where the scary haunted house is, or what the urban legend is that happened in the local woods or the neighborhood cemetery on some fabled night many years ago. Halloween is the perfect time to uncover the mystery behind those kinds of local legends. After all, what do the McDuck kids have to fear from a haunted house?
Come on, guys. We have a ghost butler. We have faced all kinds of monsters. What's gonna scare us here? Nothing.
That's an excellent point. But on the other hand, it turns out the haunted house isn't quite as abandoned as they thought. and the kids get chased through the house by monsters, only to get cornered in what seems to be a graveyard. But the kids' story isn't the only thing happening in this episode. One of the reasons everyone is out of the house in the first place is because Uncle Scrooge kicked everybody out of the mansion for the night.
Leave this house! Guess there will be no Halloween handouts here.
Sure, that's a good reason to get everyone out of the house, but it's more than a plot device to get the story moving. In fact, it's kind of a great character point for Scrooge. For the most part, this version of DuckTales tones down Scrooge's focus on acquiring various kinds of wealth and riches, but this is a great application of that ambition, substituting his drive for cash with candy, and adding in the stingy, selfish, no handout attitude by having Scrooge shut down the house for the night to trick-or-treaters. This episode even gives a good backstory reason for why Scrooge McDuck loves Halloween. It turns out Halloween was one of the only times as a poor child in Scotland that Scrooge could get his hands on something as luxurious as candy. With nowhere to go for the night, Donald and Della head to Launchpad's house to find this.
Stay away! What? You two?
At first, it looks like Launchpad has built the ultimate haunted house. But the more time Della and Donald spend with Launchpad, the more they realize that maybe Launchpad doesn't know what Halloween is. Somehow, Launchpad was just oblivious enough as a kid to never really figure out that Halloween was a game. And after wandering into the local haunted house one night, he emerged to find the streets crawling with monsters.
The soul-sucking ghouls that haunt our streets on this night.
You mean trick-or-treaters?
For Della, who wants nothing more than to have fun times scaring some kids,
Traumatized in the most wholesome way possible! I love this holiday!
this is perfect. If Launchpad thinks it's real, the kids will think it's real, and it'll be the best haunted house ever. But things quickly go south.
Come on, Donald! A little scare never hurt anyone!
I'll end this, even if I have to take all these tiny demons out one by one!
Oh no! He's gonna hurt everyone!
This is where our stories collide. Launchpad heads off to the haunted house that started what he sees as a curse on October 31st, and runs into the kids being pursued by monsters. In the end, it's mostly a big misunderstanding. The monsters just want candy, and things resolve pretty well. But to be honest, what makes this episode special to me doesn't have a lot to do with this plot. It's what's going on between Huey and Louie. Huey planned this meticulous adventure to the point that he even kind of anticipated and avoided Louie's plan, trying to ensure that they avoided the haunted house to have a perfectly planned Halloween. Louie doesn't understand why Huey is always over-planning everything, and why he insisted on controlling this night so much. So, Huey explains.
Back on the houseboat, Halloween was our biggest adventure every year. We'd suit up, face the unknown, search for the best candy. Sure, it was just neighborhood trick-or-treating, but it was ours. I don't want this to be our last Halloween.
The funny thing is, I felt this way as a kid too. I hated getting older every Halloween, worrying that it would be my last one. Because Halloween was the one time a year that my friends and I were allowed to go out after dark on our own. Maybe it would be seen as an unsafe way to handle your kids by today's standards. But with the neighborhood lit up with decorations and families everywhere, it seemed safer without our parents that night than usual. And it really did feel like a big adventure. Plus, you got tons of candy. I mean, free candy! Like Huey though, every year I just didn't want it to be my last Halloween trick-or-treating. We probably went out for a few years longer than we should have, but we just couldn't help ourselves. Trick-or-treating is one of those things from childhood that, for one reason or another, just kind of has an age limit on it. At some point, you're expected to grow out of it and take on another role. Maybe running a haunted house and playing pranks like Della, or dressing up in a nice costume and enjoying handing out candy to the younger generation, like Donald. For me, the scariest thing about Halloween was knowing that each year might be your last, because only kids were allowed to trick or treat, and sooner or later you just wouldn't be a kid anymore. Of course, as scary as that was at the time, as you get older you learn how much more there is to enjoy about Halloween, namely sharing the joy of that holiday with others, and I think this episode captures that really well. Maybe it's a little silly and unbelievable that Launchpad somehow never learned what Halloween was after all those years. But his ignorance of trick-or-treating sets up kind of the perfect mature way to look at the holiday. Sure, you may have to give up trick-or-treating yourself when you get older, but teaching the next generation of all of your favorite traditions, seeing everyone's cool costumes, and sharing the holiday spirit can be just as fun. It might not be the most character-driven episode of DuckTales, but this story does do a pretty good job of hitting all the major points of what modern Halloween is for a lot of people. And that's everything a Halloween special needs to be. And just so you don't think I missed it, there's also a ton of really great Halloween references throughout this episode. Like Donald and Della's costumes, they're straight out of a 1938 cartoon called Donald's Better Self. Having him and Della split the costumes to represent the more pure and mischievous Halloween intentions is kind of great. Scrooge also does this funny little jig as he heads out to trick-or-treat, which is actually the Silly Symphony skeleton dance. There are also references to classic horror films sprinkled throughout the episode, and I'm sure I didn't catch even half of them. Did you catch any references I might have missed? Let me know what you found in the comments below. As for me, I think this might be one of my new favorite Halloween specials. It captures a lot of the safe adventure feelings I remember having when I was a kid about this holiday, and touches on how many different ways there are to enjoy Halloween. But that's it for this review. As always, please feel free to take a moment to comment, like, subscribe, and do all of that YouTube stuff. Even if you don't, thanks for watching. And as always, take it easy, Internet.